The sun was setting over the vast, endless prairie, casting long shadows across the tall grasses. The wind howled through the trees, carrying whispers of something wild, something free. In the distance, a figure moved, small against the enormity of the open land. She was just a child, no more than 8 or 9, with her hair tangled from the breeze and her clothes dusty from the adventure. But her eyes, those wide, searching eyes, gleamed with a sense of wonder and curiosity that only children possess. She had always felt a pull toward the wilderness, an inexplicable connection to the land and the creatures that roamed it. The stories her grandmother had told her, about the wild horses that ran with the wind and the untamed beauty of the world outside, had always stayed with her. But now, standing on the edge of the wide open field, she felt like something was calling her. Something more than just the wind. Something she could not yet understand, but could feel deep in her bones. That day, her feet carried her farther than ever before. With each step, the world seemed to open up in front of her, revealing a landscape so vast and untouchable, it made her feel like she was the only person alive in the world. The grass rippled like a green sea, and the sky above was a flawless canvas of gold and orange, painting the horizon in warm, inviting colors. It was perfect. Until she saw it. At first, it was just a shadow in the distance. A movement that didn't quite make sense against the stillness of the plains. But as she walked closer, the shape became clearer. A horse. A wild stallion, its coat the color of midnight, gleaming under the fading light. It stood there, at the edge of a small clearing, its head lifted high, eyes dark and watchful. Its muscles rippled beneath its sleek coat as it grazed, unaware of her presence at first. She had heard stories, of course, of wild horses who roamed these plains, untamed and free, moving like ghosts through the tall grass. But she never imagined she would see one, let alone get close enough to truly understand the power and grace these animals held. She stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the stallion's gaze shifted toward her. For a moment, it felt like time itself had paused. She was caught in its stare, and the world around her disappeared. Something about the way it looked at her was different. It wasn't fear or aggression, it was curiosity, an understanding that was beyond words. In that instant, she realized something extraordinary. The horse knew her, in a way that made her feel seen, understood, in a world where she often felt small and invisible. The stillness between them stretched on, both of them suspended in that magical moment, until the stallion broke the silence. It took a single step forward, its hooves striking the earth with quiet confidence. A sound so simple, yet so powerful, like a warning or an invitation. The little girl's heart raced as she felt something stir inside her, something ancient, something wild, pulling her closer to the magnificent creature. She had never felt so alive, so connected to something greater than herself. The world around her seemed to fade away, leaving only the bond forming between them two beings, so different, yet so alike in their yearning for freedom and understanding. But then, just as she was about to take a step closer, the wind shifted. The stallion's ears flicked back, and it suddenly reared up, its powerful legs kicking into the air. The ground trembled beneath her feet as the mighty creature bolted into the wild, its body flowing like water, disappearing into the horizon. She stood there, breathless, a rush of emotions flooding over her. Confusion. Fear. But most of all, she had felt its presence. She had been seen by the wild stallion. But what did it all mean? Why had it come to her? Why had it left? The air grew colder as the last traces of sunlight slipped away, and the prairie around her seemed to whisper with secrets. She turned to head back home, but her mind was racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in her, something deep and irrevocable. As she walked back toward the fading glow of the farmhouse in the distance, the mystery of the wild stallion stayed with her, gnawing at her thoughts. What if that encounter had been just the beginning? What if there was something more waiting for her out there on the plains, something that would change her life forever? but she had no answers. Not yet. All she knew was that, in that fleeting moment, she had been part of something greater than herself. Something wild. Something untamed. And she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The wild stallion had seen her. And somehow, she knew it was waiting for her to come back. The question was, would she? The days following that encounter were a blur. The little girl found it harder to focus in school, her thoughts constantly drifting back to the wild stallion. Each time she closed her eyes, she could still see its powerful form, galloping away into the sunset, its eyes meeting hers one last time. It wasn't just a fleeting image, it felt like a presence, like it was still there, waiting for her. But the world around her continued. Her family's farm, nestled at the edge of the prairie, was a busy place, filled with the daily routines of feeding animals, tending to the land, and fixing fences that seemed to break with the seasons. She helped her parents as best she could, running errands, mending tools, or watching her younger siblings. But every chore, every moment spent away from the open fields felt like a distraction, pulling her further away from the one thing that truly mattered to her now, the stallion. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, words she had spoken many years ago when the girl was just a toddler. There's a magic in the wild, child. It runs through the veins of this land, and some are chosen to feel it. It's not something you can see with your eyes, but it's there, in the air you breathe, in the earth beneath your feet. At the time, she hadn't understood, had thought them just stories, legends passed down from generations that had lived alongside the land. But now, standing on the edge of the vast prairie, with the memory of the stallion still fresh in her mind, she realized her grandmother had known something deeper, something she could only now begin to grasp. That restless feeling didn't subside. In fact, it only grew. She began wandering farther each day, past the familiar fence lines, beyond the barn, into the stretches of wild grass and rugged terrain that her parents warned her to avoid. The prairie, once a place of peaceful solitude, had become an enigma, a space that beckoned her, demanding to be explored. It was as though the land itself was calling her, urging her to uncover its hidden mysteries. But every time she ventured too far, the thought of the stallion, its wild energy, its untamed beauty would stop her in her tracks. The fear of what might happen next kept her tethered, though she didn't understand why. Her younger brother noticed the change. He was the adventurous sort, always dragging her into games, daring her to run faster or climb higher. But lately, he seemed to be looking for her more, calling out her name in the fields, peering through the barn windows when she didn't come home on time. He didn't understand what was happening. Neither did she, but she knew she couldn't talk to him about it, not yet. He was too young to understand the strange connection she felt to the wild stallion, the strange sense that she was somehow linked to it, as though their fates had been tied together in some way that could never be undone. It was on one of these early morning walks that she decided to venture farther than before, deeper into the heart of the prairie. The air was still cool, the mist hanging thick in the grass like a veil, and the sun was just beginning to climb over the horizon. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that she had to keep going, had to find some answer to the questions that burned within her. What had the stallion meant by that gaze? Why had it left without a word, without a sign? The thought of it gnawed at her every moment. She reached the clearing where she had first seen the horse. The landscape was eerily quiet, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The wind had died down, leaving only the faintest rustle of leaves and the soft hum of insects in the distance. There was no sign of the stallion. No hoofprints. No traces of its presence. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She stood in center of the clearing, the silence pressing in around her, and slowly, tentatively, she called out, "I'm here. I want to understand." Her voice trembled in the stillness, but it felt good to speak, to break the silence that had settled over her. She didn't know what she was expecting, but for a moment, nothing happened. The wind didn't stir. The grass didn't sway. And then just as she was about to turn and leave, the ground beneath her feet shifted. It was so subtle at first, she almost thought she imagined it. A soft thud, like the earth had taken a deep breath. But then it came again, louder this time, a vibration running through ground like a heartbeat, steady and strong. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The sensation of being watched intensified, and then without warning the stallion appeared, emerging from the thicket of trees like a shadow brought to life. Its coat shimmered in the morning light, its mane flowing in the breeze, wild and untamed. The sight of it took her breath away. It was closer than she had ever seen it before, so close that she could feel the heat radiating from its body, the power that pulsed beneath its sleek coat. Its eyes locked onto hers once again, deep and unwavering, and for the briefest moment, everything around her faded. The stallion's presence consumed her thoughts, filled her entire being. There was no fear this time, only a strange sense of calm, as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath along with her. The stallion took a single step forward, its hooves sinking slightly into the earth as it moved. She stood still, unsure of what to do, but something inside her urged her not to move, not to run. She was frozen, not by fear, but by something deeper, something far more profound. The air around them seemed charged, thick with anticipation. And then it happened. The stallion's head dipped slightly, as if acknowledging her presence, before it tossed its mane and turned away. But instead of bolting off as it had the last time, it stopped at the edge of the clearing, its back to her, its posture tense. It was waiting for her. Waiting for her to make the next move. A rush of emotions flooded her. Was this a test? Was it asking her to follow, to take that next step into the unknown, into a world that could change her forever? The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum, a quiet pulse that echoed through her body. Her heart raced in her chest as she took a step forward. Another. The stallion remained still, its body poised like a statue, watching her every move. She felt her body respond, her feet drawn forward by some invisible force, as though the earth itself was guiding her. But as she took another step, a sharp sound split the air, the sudden crack of a twig breaking beneath the weight of something heavy. The stallion's head snapped around, its ears pinned back, and for the briefest moment, its body tensed as if preparing to flee. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. In the distance, a shadow moved, dark and shifting, between the trees. Something was coming. Something that wasn't the wind. The stallion seemed to sense it, its body trembling with a primal instinct, its eyes wide with alarm. And then, in a flash, it bolted, running with the speed and power of a storm, its form disappearing into the wilds of the prairie. She stood there, heart pounding, her body shaking with adrenaline. What had just happened? What had she seen? Who or what was out there? The answers felt so close, within her reach, but now they were slipping away. The stallion was gone. And the shadow and the trees remained. The silence after the stallion disappeared was deafening. The wind had stopped completely, and all that remained was the faint rustle of leaves as they shook in the distance. She stood there, her body frozen, her pulse racing in her ears. What had she just witnessed? The sudden urgency in the stallion's departure, the flicker of something or someone moving in the trees. It all felt too strange, too unnerving. Her heart was still pounding in her chest when she finally gathered the courage to move. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward the shadows in the trees. Her feet felt heavy, as if the earth was urging her to stay, to avoid whatever danger lurked just beyond the edge of the clearing. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was just out of reach, something she had to uncover. She began walking toward the trees, each step feeling more uncertain than the last. Her mind raced, but no answers seemed to come. What was out there? Who or what had caused the stallion to react with such fear? The stallion had never shown fear before, it had always seemed so sure of itself, untouchable. But now, it had fled at the mere sound of something moving in the brush. She could feel the tension in the air, a sense of something wrong, something she wasn't supposed to know. As she neared the trees, she noticed something on the ground, a trail, faint but distinct, leading deeper into the woods. Hoofprints. Large, unmistakable, like those left by the stallion, but scattered with something else. Something smaller, more erratic. She crouched down, her breath catching in her throat as she traced the markings with her fingers. The prints didn't just look like they belonged to another animal, they felt off, like a sign of something unnatural. Suddenly, a branch cracked nearby, and she snapped her head up. The sound was sharp, unnatural, like someone or something was following her. She stood frozen, staring into the trees, waiting for any movement. The birds had gone quiet, the usual hum of life in the woods stilled. She waited, heart in her throat, but nothing came. The silence was back, suffocating and thick. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something just beyond her line of sight. Her hand tightened around the branch she had been using to steady herself, and she took another step forward. At that moment, the ground trembled. It was subtle, but enough to send a ripple of fear through her chest. She stumbled, but caught herself. The earth felt alive beneath her feet, as though some force was rising from it, pulling her in. Another crack, this time closer, followed by the unmistakable sound of hooves pounding the earth. She spun around just in time to see a figure darting through the trees, its dark shape weaving through the underbrush like a shadow on the move. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the stallion, or at least, what looked like the stallion. But there was something wrong. Its movements were jerky, as if something were controlling it, urging it forward against its will. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but she stood rooted to the spot, watching in confusion and fear as the stallion skidded to a halt just a few feet away. Its eyes were wide with terror, its body trembling as it seemed to look around in desperation. Then, as if sensing her presence, it locked eyes with her again. But this time, there was no recognition in those eyes. No calm, no connection. Just fear. Then, the ground trembled again, this time much harder, and the air seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The stallion reared up, throwing its head back with a wild scream. It was as though the earth itself was shaking in response, and she could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a pull, an unseen force drawing them both towards something she could neither understand nor resist. Without warning, the stallion took off again, faster this time, its body lurching as if it were fighting against some unseen force. She watched it disappear into the trees, her heart pounding in her chest, uncertainty growing with every second that passed. What was happening? Why was the stallion acting like this? And what had caused the panic in its eyes? She stood there for a long time, the stillness returning once more. But this time, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick with something darker, something unseen. As she began to walk back toward the clearing, her thoughts raced. The stallion wasn't just a wild animal. It was something more, something that was connected to the land, to the strange energy she had felt rising from the earth. There was a presence here, a force tied to the wild, something ancient and powerful that was stirring beneath the surface. And she could feel it calling to her, just as the stallion had. But what was it? And why had it turned on her? Back at the farm, her family was already preparing dinner when she returned, the warm, comforting smells of home filling the air. But the safety of the house couldn't erase the questions still gnawing at her. She hadn't told anyone about what she had seen. No one would believe her anyway. Her parents were busy with the day-to-day work of running the farm, and her younger brother was caught up in his own games, blissfully unaware of the unease that had settled into her bones. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind refused to quiet. Her grandmother's words echoed in her thoughts, "There's a magic in the wild child. Some are chosen to feel it." Could it be that she had been chosen? Was the stallion meant to show her something, to guide her toward a deeper understanding of the land and its mysteries? But what did it all mean? And why had the stallion fled when it had sensed something in the trees? Who or what was lurking in the woods? The trail of hoofprints had been unmistakable, but they had led nowhere, vanishing into the unknown. And then there was the matter of the strange energy she had felt beneath the earth. It was like a pulse, a heartbeat, something ancient that had been waiting to be awakened. Was it tied to the stallion? To the land itself? The question swirled in her mind, but she knew one thing for certain: whatever had happened today, whatever had stirred in the woods, was far from over. The stallion had seen something, and she had felt it too. A darkness, a power, rising from the earth, waiting to claim what it had been promised. And she couldn't shake the feeling that she was connected to it, that whatever it was would soon come for her, too. But what if it wasn't just the land calling her? What if the stallion wasn't the only one watching? What if something was already waiting, closer than she realized, something that would change everything? The days dragged on in a strange, tense rhythm. Each morning, the sun would rise over the prairie, casting its warm light on the land, but it never seemed to touch her heart in the same way it once had. The beauty of the landscape, the freedom of the open sky, all seemed distant now. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig, made her heart race with dread. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had felt in the woods that day, the strange, pulsing energy that had radiated from the earth and drawn her in like a magnet. Something was stirring out there, something powerful and ancient. And she was tied to it. Her nights were filled with restless dreams, flashes of images she couldn't quite make sense of. The stallion's eyes, wide with terror, locked onto hers once again. It galloped through the darkness, its hooves pounding the earth, running from something she couldn't see. The ground trembled, and the air grew thick with a palpable tension, as if something monstrous was just beyond her reach. She would wake, drenched in sweat, the feeling of that unseen presence lingering in the shadows of her mind, but each time, she couldn't remember the full dream. It always slipped away, leaving her with only the sense that whatever was coming, whatever was chasing the stallion, was drawing nearer. One morning, after weeks of uneasy silence, it happened again. She awoke early, the first light of dawn just beginning to spill over the horizon. Something was different this time. The air felt heavier, charged with an unsettling energy. Her breath caught in her throat as she heard it, just the faintest echo of hooves in the distance. She stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing, before she grabbed her jacket and slipped quietly out of the house. Her family was still asleep, and she knew they wouldn't understand. They would tell her to stay home, to stop chasing something that was beyond her grasp. But she couldn't stay away. Not now. Not when the stallion, whatever it represented, was calling her once again. As she stepped out into the crisp morning air, she was met with an eerie stillness. The land, usually so alive with the hum of insects and the rustle of wildlife, seemed to hold its breath. The trees were silent, the grass unmoving. But then, in the distance, she saw the silhouette of the stallion, standing just at the edge of the clearing, as if waiting for her. Her heart skipped a beat. The stallion's eyes locked onto hers once more. The connection was instant and overwhelming, as though it could see straight into her soul. There was no fear in its eyes now, no confusion. Only an intense, raw urgency. She could feel it. The stallion was no longer running from something, it was waiting for her. She knew deep down that this moment, the one she had been circling around for so long, was finally here. But as she took a step forward, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift again, and a deep rumble filled the air. It was the same sensation she had felt before, only this time it was stronger. More intense. Like the land itself was trembling with anticipation. Her breath quickened, and she hesitated. Something was wrong. The stallion seemed to sense it, its ears flicking back, its body tensing as if it too could feel the rising storm. The air grew colder, and the wind picked up, swirling around her like an invisible force. The prairie, usually so wide and open, now felt constricted, the space around her shrinking. Her skin tingled with the electric charge in the air, and the silence was deafening, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Then, just beyond the trees, she saw it. At first, it was only a shadow, a movement, swift and silent, like something that didn't quite belong to this world. But as it drew closer, she could make out its shape, a figure, tall and cloaked, moving with unnatural grace through the underbrush. It didn't make a sound. No rustling leaves, no snapping twigs. Just the unmistakable presence of something or someone out there in the shadows, waiting. Her heart pounded in her chest. The stallion seemed to sense it too, its body coiled like a spring, ready to bolt. It tossed its head, as if trying to decide whether to flee or confront whatever was coming. The figure in the trees was drawing closer, the shadows shifting as it moved with purpose. She knew she shouldn't be here. She should have turned back, gone home, and pretended none of this had ever happened. But something inside her, something deep and instinctive, told her she couldn't leave now. Not when the stallion was so close, not when it needed her. She had to face whatever was coming. She had to understand what was happening to her, to the land, to the wild force she could feel in the earth beneath her feet. The figure stepped out from the trees, and for a brief moment, she could only stare. It was a man, or at least, it looked like a man. Tall, with long, flowing hair that blended with the shadows. His face was obscured, hidden beneath a hooded cloak that seemed to absorb the light around him, as if he was part of the darkness itself. His eyes, though, were unmistakable, pale and cold, like the moonlight, glowing with an unnatural intensity. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to send a chill down her spine. The stallion whinnied, its voice sharp and panicked, as it took a step back. The man's gaze turned slowly toward the horse, his lips curling into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. There was something in that smile, something cold, something predatory that sent a wave of fear crashing over her. "Come," the man finally spoke, his voice low and smooth, carrying a strange power that seemed to wrap around her like a physical force. "It's time." She didn't understand. Time for what? What did he mean? The stallion's eyes were still locked onto hers, filled with fear and warning. It pawed the ground, its body tense, as if begging her to run. But she couldn't move. Her body felt rooted to the spot, her mind spinning with questions, with confusion. What was this man? Why was Stallion so afraid of him? What did he want with her? The air seemed to grow heavier, as if the very atmosphere was pressing down on her chest. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as though it too was about to give way. The world around her was closing in, and she realized with sudden clarity that the moment she had been anticipating, the moment that had been drawing her toward this place for so long, had arrived. And the world was about to change forever. But would she survive what was to come? As the man's eyes bore into her, the air seemed to freeze, the world narrowing down to just the two of them and the stallion, still on edge and trembling at the edge of the clearing. She couldn't look away from him. Something about his gaze held her captive, as though his eyes were pulling her into some deep, unspoken truth that she wasn't ready to face. Then, without warning, the ground beneath her feet shifted again, this time with a force that made her stumble. A low rumble, more violent than before, surged from deep within the earth. The stallion reared back, its hooves striking the air in a panic, and for the first time, she felt the raw power of what was coming. This wasn't just the land shifting, it was something much darker, something far older than she could understand. The man took a step forward, his cloak sweeping like a shadow, and his voice came again, this time with an almost imperceptible edge of impatience. "It's time, child. You cannot hide from what is coming." Her heart hammered in her chest as she took a step back, the stallion's frantic whinnies echoing in her ears. But before she could make another move, A sharp crack pierced the air, a sound like the breaking of bones, or maybe thunder in the distance. She whipped her head toward the source, her breath catching in her throat. From the trees on the other side of clearing, another figure emerged, only this one wasn't cloaked or human. It was something else entirely. It moved swiftly, fluidly, like it had been born from the forest itself. The creature was tall, with sinewy muscles that rippled beneath its dark fur, its eyes glowing a pale, unnatural shade that reflected the growing chaos around them. It had the body of a beast, the form of a wolf, but it was far too large, far too menacing, its fangs gleaming like knives in the dim light. Its fur seemed to shimmer, shifting colors with every movement, as if it existed in a space between reality and nightmare. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "Ah, there you are," he muttered, as if speaking to the beast, though the words were meant for her. The creature's glowing eyes turned toward her, and a chill swept through her body. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown anymore, it was the certainty that whatever this thing was, it had been waiting for her. Waiting for her to step into this moment, into this very clearing, as though she had been destined for it. A pawn in some twisted game she didn't understand. The stallion let out a strangled cry, more desperate now, as if it realized the truth too. This was no longer just about the land, the magic that pulsed beneath its surface, or the force drawing her into the woods. This was something ancient, something tied to the very fabric of the world, something that had been lying dormant, waiting to awaken. The man's voice rose, sharp and commanding. "Do not fear, child. You are chosen. This is your inheritance." Her body froze. Chosen? Inheritance? What was he talking about? Her mind spun with confusion, but before she could form a question, the ground shook again, more violently now. The air became thick with the sense of something cracking open, as though the earth was splitting at the seams, revealing something deep beneath, something far older than the forest itself. She stumbled backward, her heart racing, but then the creature moved. Faster than she could react, it lunged toward her, its body a blur of darkness and power. Its fangs bared, its jaws snapping, and for a split second she thought it was going to tear her apart. But the stallion, the very creature that had been terrified earlier, suddenly charged forward with a strength she hadn't seen before, its hooves striking the earth like thunder. It collided with beast in a flurry of motion, hooves and claws scraping against each other in a clash of raw force. The beast was strong, undeniably powerful, but the stallion fought with a desperation she hadn't known it possessed, its eyes wild and burning with a fierce protectiveness. She watched, horrified, as the two creatures grappled, the sounds of their struggle filling the clearing, each movement sending ripples through ground beneath them. The man stood motionless, watching the fight unfold with a cold, detached expression, his smile never wavering. It was as if this battle, this chaos, was all part of some greater plan he was orchestrating. Her pulse thundered in her ears, the raw power of the moment sweeping over her. She knew, in that instant, that nothing was as it seemed. The stallion wasn't just protecting her, it was fighting for something more. And the creature wasn't just a wild beast, it was a force of darkness, something linked to the very thing that had been awakening beneath the earth. The struggle between the two beasts grew fiercer, and the air around her seemed to vibrate with a dangerous energy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She felt it again, that pull from deep within the earth, that call to something she couldn't name. The man's words echoed in her mind, "You are chosen." Chosen for what? She tried to move, to run, but her legs were frozen, as if the very land had claimed her. The man's eyes flicked to her once more, and this time, there was a glimmer of something, satisfaction, perhaps, or even amusement. He spoke, his voice a low whisper that cut through the chaos of the battle between the two creatures. "You cannot escape it. The magic is already inside you. It has always been inside you." Before she could react, a sudden surge of energy erupted from the ground. It wasn't a physical force, not something she could touch or see, but it was there, powerful, undeniable. It shot up from the earth like a pulse, filling the air with an intense heat. The stallion broke free of the beast, but it wasn't enough. The ground beneath them cracked open, and with it, the dark creature lunged forward, its eyes locked onto hers, filled with an unspeakable hunger. In that moment, everything changed. The stakes weren't just about the stallion anymore. This was a battle for something far greater than any of them could have imagined. And the very earth beneath her feet seemed to rise up, its force demanding her attention, pulling her into the center of the storm that was now consuming everything around her. The silence before the storm was over, and the true battle for control of the land, the magic, and her very soul had begun. The energy around her surged to a fever pitch, the ground trembling beneath her feet as if the world itself was cracking open. The air was thick with heat, with power. The stallion, its body coated in sweat, fought with all its might against the dark creature, but it was no use. The beast was too strong, its claws raking through the air with deadly precision, forcing the stallion back. And then, as the ground cracked once more, she saw it something deep beneath the surface, glowing with an otherworldly light, a pulse that seemed to echo with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Her breath caught in her chest as the realization hit her. The power wasn't just in the earth, it was within her. The land had been calling to her because she was its chosen vessel, its protector, its key. The stallion hadn't been protecting her from the creature, it had been protecting her from herself. The man, still standing at the edge of the clearing, watched her with that same cold smile, as though this moment had been planned from the very beginning. "It's time," he repeated, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "You have felt it, haven't you? The magic coursing through your veins. The land has chosen you, and now you must rise to claim your destiny." The realization was like a flood, overwhelming her senses. She had always known there was something different about her, something that set her apart from the world she had grown up in, but she had never imagined it could be something so immense, so ancient. The stallion, the creature, the land itself, they were all part of a greater design, one that she had only now begun to understand. She wasn't just a witness to this battle, she was the key to ending it. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and as if drawn by some unseen force, the ground beneath her responded. The pulse deep within the earth grew stronger, more insistent, and suddenly, the air around her crackled with energy. She could feel the power surging through her, filling her with warmth and strength. The stallion, sensing the shift, stopped its frantic movements, its eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that left her breathless. It was no longer afraid. It was waiting for her to act. The dark creature hesitated, sensing the change. The air grew still, the tension palpable. The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of cautious expectation. He had underestimated her, and now, she could see the doubt in his eyes. He had believed that he could control her, bend her to the land's will, but he hadn't accounted for one thing, the power of choice. With a deep breath, she stepped forward. The energy coursing through her was overwhelming, but it was also familiar. It was hers. She could feel it building inside her, ready to be unleashed. The stallion stepped beside her, its form strong and steadfast, a silent ally in this moment of truth. Together, they stood against the creature, against everything that had sought to control her. The dark beast lunged again, its massive form barreling toward her with a terrifying speed, but this time, she was ready. She raised her hands, and the power within her flared to life. The pulse from the earth surged through her, and in an instant, the air around her shimmered with raw energy. The ground itself seemed to respond, ripples of light spreading out from her, as she called upon the force that had been dormant within her for so long. The creature recoiled, its snarls turning to hisses of pain as the light overwhelmed it. It thrashed against the energy that held it in place, but it was no use. The power that had been drawn from the earth, from the stallion, from her own heart, was too much for it to withstand. With a final scream, the creature disintegrated into a burst of dark smoke, vanishing into the air like it had never existed. For a moment, the world was still. The stallion stood beside her, breathing heavily, its eyes glowing with an understanding she couldn't fully grasp. The land, the magic, the battle, it was over. The creature was gone, and with it, the threat that had loomed over them all. She had won. But as the last remnants of darkness faded into the morning air, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath her feet began to shake again, but this time, it wasn't the same rumble as before. It wasn't the earth cracking or the land trembling, it was the heartbeat of something else. A deep, rhythmic thudding that came from deep below, like the pulse of the world itself. She turned to the man, whose expression had shifted from one of quiet expectation to something far darker, more dangerous. His eyes glinted with a knowledge she didn't have, a knowledge that told her the battle they had just fought wasn't the final one. "You've won this round," he said, his voice low and tinged with something like amusement. "But the land has always had a way of revealing its true nature. The power you've unlocked, this magic, it is only a part of something far greater. And the land will always demand a price." Her heart skipped a beat as she realized what he was implying. The power she had drawn from the earth, the magic that had flowed through her veins, it hadn't been the solution. It had been a key to something much more dangerous than the creature they had just destroyed. The land itself was stirring, awakening in a way that was beyond her control. The earth beneath her trembled once more, and this time, she could feel the force of it, the pulse of something ancient and vast. It was not an enemy she could fight. It was a force, a being, far older than any of them. The stallion's ears twitched nervously, its body shifting with unease as it sensed the change in the air. She turned back to the man, whose smile had returned, but this time, it wasn't one of victory. It was a grim acknowledgement. "The land has always had its own plans," he said. "And now, the true test begins." With those final words, the earth beneath her cracked open, and from the depths, a massive force began to rise, a new, unknown threat, one far more powerful and far more dangerous than anything she had faced before. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And this time, she wasn't sure if she was ready for what would come next. But one thing was clear: whatever this new force was, it would change everything. The earth beneath her feet cracked wide open, sending shockwaves through the ground. A deep rumble vibrated in the air, the kind that seemed to come from the very core of the world. She looked around, eyes wide with fear and awe, but there was no escaping the pull of what was happening. Something ancient and powerful was rising. It felt like the land itself was breathing alive, waiting. The stallion stood beside her, its once agitated body now calm, but its eyes were alert, as though it too could sense the danger that was approaching. The ground shifted again, and she could feel the heartbeat of the earth accelerating. Whatever was coming, it wasn't just a threat, it was a force that had been dormant for eons. And now, it was awake. The man, standing on the edge of the clearing, spoke again, his voice calm and collected, yet filled with an unsettling finality. "You've awakened it," he said, almost as if speaking to himself, though his eyes were fixed on her. "The land was never meant to be tamed. It cannot be controlled, not fully. And now, it will reclaim what's always been its own." His words settled in her mind like a weight, but before she could process them, the ground before her split open wider, and from the chasm, a shadow began to rise. It was like nothing she had ever seen, neither human nor beast, but something in between. A towering form of dark, swirling energy, its shape flickering and shifting as though it couldn't fully manifest in this world. It exuded an overwhelming presence, a power so immense that it seemed to blot out the very light around it. Her breath caught in her throat. This was the force the man had been speaking of. This was what the land had been hiding beneath its surface for centuries. And now, it was free. The stallion took a step forward, its hooves striking the ground with a newfound strength, but even it seemed to sense the enormity of the threat. The beast in front of them was not something that could be fought with brute force. It was pure energy, an embodiment of the earth's deepest power, something that had never been meant to be disturbed. But then, the man spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension. "There's only one way to stop it." She turned toward him, her mind racing. "What do you mean? How can we stop something like that?" The man's eyes darkened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something regret? Doubt? "You are the key, child," he said, his voice low. "You were chosen for this moment, to either control this power or to let it destroy everything." Her heart pounded as the realization hit her. She had always known there was something special about her, something that made her different from others, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She had unlocked something deep within herself, but the question now was whether she could control it. The creature in front of her screeched, a terrible sound that sent a shiver through her body, and the ground beneath them trembled once more. It was restless, angry. The force that had risen from the earth was not merely a physical being, it was an embodiment of the land itself, an ancient guardian that had been disturbed by her presence, by the magic she had awakened. The man seemed to read her thoughts. "The magic inside you, the power you've unlocked, it's connected to the earth, to the very forces that have shaped this world for millennia. But it must be controlled. You are the vessel, but you must learn to wield it." Fear gripped her heart. Could she really control this? Was it even possible? The power that surged within her felt like a wild storm, untamed and chaotic. How could she use it to stop something like this? The stallion, sensing her inner turmoil, stepped closer, its powerful body almost protective. She reached out instinctively, placing a hand on its neck, and as she did, a surge of warmth flowed through her. It was as if the very connection she shared with this creature, this guardian, was the key. The earth beneath her feet responded to her touch, the pulse growing stronger, more controlled. She could feel the magic inside her stabilizing, as if she was beginning to understand it, to harness it. The man watched her closely, his face unreadable. "It's time. You must bind yourself to the earth, to the power that has chosen you." She took a deep breath, feeling the power within her begin to resonate with the pulse of the land. The stallion snorted softly, its eyes meeting hers, and in that moment she understood. This was not just about defeating the creature. It was about restoring balance, about reconnecting with something primal, something that had been lost to the world for far too long. She stepped forward, her hands raised to the sky. The earth beneath her responded, the ground rumbling as if acknowledging her command. The energy within her surged, growing brighter, and for a moment she felt as though the entire world had come alive. The stallion's form shimmered beside her, its energy merging with hers, strengthening her resolve. The dark creature in front of her hissed, its body flickering in and out of existence, but it couldn't hold its form against the power she was summoning. The land was responding to her, and the force of its energy was too much for the creature to withstand. With a final cry, the creature disintegrated into the air, its form breaking apart like dust in the wind. And with it, the darkness that had been rising from the earth began to fade. The ground stopped trembling, the air cleared, and the earth settled back into its natural rhythm. The power within her didn't dissipate though. It remained calm but potent, a reminder of what she had just done. She exhaled, her body trembling from the intensity of it all, but she knew it wasn't over. The man was still watching her, his expression unreadable. She had won, but the world had changed. She had changed. "You've done it," the man said softly, his voice tinged with something almost like respect. "But remember, this power is not yours to command forever. The earth will always need a guardian. And you are now bound to it. But something in between. A towering form of dark, swirling energy, its shape flickering and shifting as though it couldn't fully manifest in this world. It exuded an overwhelming presence, a power so immense that it seemed to blot out the very light around it. Her breath caught in her throat. This was the force the man had been speaking of. This was what the land had been hiding beneath its surface for centuries. And now, it was free. The stallion took a step forward, its hooves striking the ground with a newfound strength, but even it seemed to sense the enormity of the threat. The beast in front of them was not something that could be fought with brute force. It was pure energy, an embodiment of the earth's deepest power, something that had never been meant to be disturbed. But then, the man spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension. "There's only one way to stop it." She turned toward him, her mind racing. "What do you mean? How can we stop something like that?" The man's eyes darkened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something regret? Doubt? "You are the key, child," he said, his voice low. "You were chosen for this moment, to either control this power or to let it destroy everything." Her heart pounded as the realization hit her. She had always known there was something special about her, something that made her different from others, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She had unlocked something deep within herself, but the question now was whether she could control it. The creature in front of her screeched, a terrible sound that sent a shiver through her body, and the ground beneath them trembled once more. It was restless, angry. The force that had risen from the earth was not merely a physical being, it was an embodiment of the land itself, an ancient guardian that had been disturbed by her presence, by the magic she had awakened. The man seemed to read her thoughts. "The magic inside you, the power you've unlocked, it's connected to the earth, to the very forces that have shaped this world for millennia. But it must be controlled. You are the vessel, but you must learn to wield it." Fear gripped her heart. Could she really control this? Was it even possible? The power that surged within her felt like a wild storm, untamed and chaotic. How could she use it to stop something like this? The stallion, sensing her inner turmoil, stepped closer, its powerful body almost protective. She reached out instinctively, placing a hand on its neck, and as she did, a surge of warmth flowed through her. It was as if the very connection she shared with this creature, this guardian, was the key. The earth beneath her feet responded to her touch, the pulse growing stronger, more controlled. She could feel the magic inside her stabilizing, as if she was beginning to understand it, to harness it. The man watched her closely, his face unreadable. "It's time. You must bind yourself to the earth, to the power that has chosen you." She took a deep breath, feeling the power within her begin to resonate with the pulse of the land. The stallion snorted softly, its eyes meeting hers, and in that moment, she understood. This was not just about defeating the creature. It was about restoring balance, about reconnecting with something primal, something that had been lost to the world for far too long. She stepped forward, her hands raised to the sky. The earth beneath her responded, the ground rumbling as if acknowledging her command. The energy within her surged, growing brighter, and for a moment, she felt as though the entire world had come alive. The stallion's form shimmered beside her, its energy merging with hers, strengthening her resolve. The dark creature in front of her hissed, its body flickering in and out of existence, but it couldn't hold its form against the power she was summoning. The land was responding to her, and the force of its energy was too much for the creature to withstand. With a final cry, the creature disintegrated into the air, its form breaking apart like dust in the wind. And with it, the darkness that had been rising from the earth began to fade. The ground stopped trembling, the air cleared, and the earth settled back into its natural rhythm. The power within her didn't dissipate though. It remained calm but potent, a reminder of what she had just done. She exhaled, her body trembling from the intensity of it all, but she knew it wasn't over. The man was still watching her, his expression unreadable. She had won, but the world had changed. She had changed. "You've done it," the man said softly, his voice tinged with something almost like respect. But remember, this power is not yours to command forever. The earth will always need a guardian. And you are now bound to it. She nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She wasn't just a part of the world anymore. She had become one with it, connected to the earth in a way she couldn't explain, a bond that ran deeper than blood. But as she looked at the stallion, standing beside her, she realized that she wasn't alone in this. She was never meant to be. The man turned and began to walk away, his figure slowly disappearing into the mist of the woods. The land has chosen, he called over his shoulder. And it will always find its way. She stood there, the pulse of the earth still strong beneath her feet, and felt the presence of something ancient and wise settle in her heart. This was only the beginning of her journey. She had learned to wield the magic of the land, but what would she do with it now? What would become of the power that had chosen her? As the sun began to rise, casting a warm light over the clearing, she looked to the horizon, her mind filled with questions, but also a sense of peace. The world had changed, and so had she. And whatever came next, she was ready.